everyone. We are going to be doing something a bit different for today. We are going to be comparing and contrasting the two collector's edition for Persona 5. We have the Take Your Heart edition, which is sold in the West, and then we have the 20th anniversary edition sold to the East. In a little segment I'd like to call East versus West. Let's get started. First, we're going to be taking a look at the content for the Take Your Heart edition. This collector's edition includes the following: the Morgana Plush, the Shujin Academy bag replica, the base game with the steel bookcase, the P5 soundtrack, and the hardcover art book. The 20th anniversary edition contains the following: the game DLC, the 20th anniversary soundtrack, the base game. And the hardcover art book. So let's start by going in depth on the Take Your Heart Edition items. First, we're going to be taking a look at the Morgana Plush. I'd say the plush itself is pretty average when it comes to make. I don't see any problems with the stitching when I got it. Seems to be fairly cute because of course it's the Persona 5 mascot. So of course it's going to be cute, but again, it's an average plush by itself. Next is the P5 soundtrack. So I know that this is not the complete soundtrack. I actually bought the separate soundtrack for Persona 5 and I believe it's 3 discs. This only has 19 tracks. The main Persona 5 soundtrack itself, I'd say, is about 100 soundtracks in there. So I'd say this is more of a sound selection than a proper soundtrack. It does the job. I wish they could have packaged it a lot better than using a cardboard sleeve. And they could have increased the number of songs that are in there. Again, overall, it's pretty basic, but it does the job. Next is the game with the steel case. So the steel case is, I'd say, a preference when it comes to games. I do know that there are people who like the normal base case just because it blends well with their library. Personally, I actually prefer the steel case just because they do special artwork when it comes to the case itself. For example, this artwork for the steel case of Persona 5, it's actually pretty fantastic. It's a folded artwork, so if you unravel the whole thing, both front and back, it's connected as one whole artwork. So I think that's pretty cool. Overall, I actually prefer the steel case rather than the normal case. Next up is the Shujin Academy bag replica. Like the plush, I would say it's a pretty standard bag, shoulder bag, honestly. I would call this a cosplay item since it actually does resemble the Shujin Academy bag from the game. And finally, the art book. So I'm on two sides of this art book. One, I do appreciate that it's hardbound, so it actually does look nice on the shelf. On the other hand, the contents are pretty basic. Doesn't have any concept art. It does have the storyboards, character art. I wish there could have been more. I have bought the art book of Persona 5 separately, and it does display concept art for each character. So I'd say it's pretty incredible seeing those concept arts as well as the first version of these characters. Overall, again, it's a basic art book. I wish they could have done more, but it is what it is. Now let's move on to the East version. First up is the game DLC. While I'd say this is the weakest item for the East, just because personally the version I got is pretty much a pre-owned version of the collector's edition. Second, since I'm using a Western PS4 account, I can't actually use this. I do appreciate the packaging of the DLC as well as the letter from Igor. I do appreciate that. Again, it's the lowest value for me. If you have an Eastern PS4 account or a Japanese PS4 account, it's probably more useful for you. But for me, it's not that high of a value. Again, I appreciate the packaging. It does look nice. It looks like an invite to the Velvet Room. So that is a very nice touch for the packaging of this DLC. Next is the 20th anniversary soundtrack. Now, again, the P5 disc of the soundtrack is, I would say, pretty much comparable to the Western one. The main difference, though, is because this is the 20th anniversary of Persona, they included a sound selection from Persona 1 through 5. So that's a pretty incredible value, if you ask me, just because you can see how the soundtrack evolved from Persona 1 through 5. Next up is the base game. So again, just like what I mentioned from the steel case, I prefer the steel case edition of this game just because of the additional artwork that's provided on the steel case. Again, a lot of people like this just because it blends well with their game library. So I would say this is a more personal preference. Again, nothing too special. I wish they could have done more, because they did prove that they could have done more with the steel case of the Take Your Heart edition. I wish they could have done the same for the Japanese version of this collector's edition. And finally, the art book. Again, the art book is similar. It's actually the same art book as the one on the east, or I mean the west version. It's just in Japanese. What do I actually prefer between the two? Honestly, it's personal preference and what your priorities are. What your priorities are when it comes to Persona 5. Do you want to cosplay? If you do like cosplay, I would think that the Take Your Heart edition would have more value to you just because of the plush and the replica, or the bag replica, I mean. But for me, I actually like the music of Persona, and seeing it there, seeing the history of the soundtrack from 1 through 5, it's an incredible value for me. So personally, I like the 20th anniversary edition better just because of the soundtrack. Again, the Western version is not bad. The soundtrack is kind of missing. I wish they'd done more, add more songs in there, and then of course packaged it a lot better than a cardboard CD sleeve. But the Shujin Academy bag replica, as well as the Morgana Plush, is nice. Again, this is all personal preference, depending on what you want to do. So if your main goal is cosplay, I'd say the Take Your Heart edition is for you. But for me, as a casual Persona fan that loves the music, I would go for the 20th anniversary edition. Alright, that wraps up our comparison. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon.